it. And it looks like we're recording. Now we're recording. Fantastic. So hello, everyone who's joining us for the first time, whether you're getting this as, you know, if you're here for the live seminars this week, but you're only seeing this after the live session because you've got other things on, or if you're someone who's bought a ticket down the line and is watching the recording at your leisure, at your own pace. Either way, hello. And of course, hello to those of you who are watching live right now as well. Welcome back to another seminar. I'm going to run through the first bits really quickly because a lot of it will be stuff you already know if you were here last week. So welcome back. First of all, thanks for joining us for another fun-filled, informative session of Game Design Online. Let's just recap some things we talked about last week. So first of all, what is a tabletop game? All sorts of things. The stuff that we do is primarily geared around kind of tabletop board games, but equally we use the same process for designing role-playing games. We use it for designing card games. I've used it for various other things. So this process will work for any sort of tabletop game, really. There may be some bits that apply more than others. But in short, we're looking at any games that you can play on or around a table, maybe with some other people, maybe with physical components, maybe not. The definition is all over the place. If anyone can think of a good term for it, let me know on Discord later. Last week we talked about, among other things, our design process. And I want to recap that really quickly because it's quite important based on what we're going to talk about today. So when we design games at Needy Cat Games, we have a 6-stage process that we go through. And that is true whether we're designing a game for ourselves or for a client. So we always start with a kickoff where we think about what the parameters of the project are. Any constraints, any things that we really, want to get in there, any things that we definitely don't want to have in the project. We start thinking about all that sort of stuff. Then we do a load of research, and we'll talk today about research, why it's important, why it matters. Then we get into the test build, which is the first time the game itself hits the table. And really, you want to kind of accelerate the process to get to that stage as quickly as possible. And so the test build, again, we'll talk about that today in more detail, but that is like you're looking to create the minimum playable chunk of your game. So usually it's about what one player does on their turn or what one round of play looks like. Once we've done that, we extend outwards and we add a start and a finish to the game. So we think about what one linear playthrough could look like, and we don't worry necessarily about trying to include every single element. We just make sure there's a playable version of the game. Once we've done that, we go to the full build where we expand the breadth and we think about different options, different modular elements that might come in, things that might make the game more replayable. And then finally, we hand it over to some people who can make it look pretty. We get it edited, we make sure it's all nice and shiny, and we amend it. And then theoretically, at some point, it gets sent to print and becomes an actual finished game. That's our process. So again, today we're talking about the research and the test build mostly. But we're also talking a little bit about some general things about ideas, and I'll tell you that in a moment. This is the second part of the 6-week course. So this is about starting a game design project. So last time we talked about some of the basics of just getting your head in the right frame of mind to design a game. Today we're talking about how to actually start getting those ideas onto the table. By the end of the session, you'll have all that you need to start designing and playing a game. It really is that easy. Honest. Next week, we're talking about playtesting. Week after that, rules writing. Week after that, more about rules writing because it's quite a big topic, really. And then finally, we'll talk about what you can do once you've got a game finished. Finished being a very strange term, which I don't fully understand myself. As ever, there is no one way to do this. There's no one correct answer. I encourage you to learn some basics from us, from other people, read broadly, look at different things, and then forge your own path, do your own thing. There are lots of great resources out there for game designers these days. Thank you ever so much for choosing these ones to check out. And I recommend looking at some others as well. As last week, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Feel free to drop them in the chat while I'm talking. As soon as the question comes up, I might not answer it straight away, but I'll do a little roundup of questions at the end of each section. And if you want to ask any questions, then you can do. But if you can drop it in sooner rather than later, it saves me having to kind of ad lib while I wait for the little someone is typing bit to go away. I'm fine with ad libbing, but let's keep it moving along, right? You can get involved, as much or as little as you'd like to. And if there's any big topics that don't really fit into the different sections, we can talk about them in Discord afterwards. So we did this last week. We had about 3 people, I think, turned up. As many of you as want to are welcome to come along. We have a little voice chat, or you can type and I'll chat back at you. It's basically just a much more interactive little tag at the end of this whole thing. So with that in mind, let's get going on this week's seminar. The first section is about finding inspiration, which is a thing that we get asked a lot about by new designers specifically. Where do you get your ideas from? I'm going to tell you. Any game, any creative project, anything you do is a series of ideas. You might have ideas for the concept, for the mechanics, whatever it is, but a game is a staggering monolith of ideas. As we learned last week, an idea by itself doesn't really mean much, but it still needs to happen. And to create those ideas, you need inspiration. You can wait for that inspiration to strike, or you can put some work in and some hard graft and create that inspiration. So let's have a look at what that all sort of means. So yeah, as it says here, a game is a series of ideas. The concept's an idea, theme's an idea, mechanics are an idea, the box contents are an idea. How your game's going to be marketed is an idea if you get down to that sort of level. And these ideas, they are nested. Each idea is made of smaller ideas. You have the core concept of your game, which is like a large idea. I'm going to make a game about, I don't know, trading weasels in Sheffield. The Sheffield weasel trade being a historic topic about which I care an awful lot. I'm going to make that, and that is an idea in itself. And I'm then going to start thinking about, well, why weasels? What's the theme about weasels? Are there different types of weasels? Are there things that I should be considering as a weasel farmer, breeder, whatever the correct term would be, which will tie in thematically? What sort of mechanics do we have in play here? Can the weasels escape? If they do, are we concerning ourselves with whether we track them down, or is that just a weasel's gone and we're going to lose that from the game? You'll have all these different ideas that filter down from your one central concept, and each one of those can be made of different things. And your ideas will also overlap and be interlinked. So, as I say, it's this complex structure built of ideas. But it really does help to think of your game in that sort of term. So, it is a series of discrete ideas, some of which are linked, some of which are nested. And it says there again, a little reminder, ideas by themselves are worthless. We learned that last week in the 5, what were they called? The 5 ruinous myths. There we go. Been using that phrase for about 5 years, and I've forgotten what it was then. But yeah, an idea by itself is worthless. We're going to think about how we work on it. This is the most important slide I will ever show you, because it contains the secret of game design. Game design is easy. You come up with an idea, you test it, you either discard it, replace it, or refine it, and you repeat. And that's game design in a nutshell. There we go. Thanks for coming. This has been a very much shorter course than I intended, but hopefully you've learned something. Of course, it's not quite as easy as that. But really, you boil it down, that is the creative process. That is the iterative process of game design. You take an idea, you test it, you examine it, you put it under the microscope, you take it to the anvil. My metaphors are getting mixed there. But you work it and you see which bits of it are good, and you take away everything else, and you work and you improve the parts that are already working and make them better. The rest of this course, like seminars 3, 4, and 5, talk a lot about sort of testing, refinement, codifying your ideas in written form. But how do we get ideas in the first place? Because on the one hand, it's incredibly easy. As I've said before, all designers will have a load of ideas. That's it. Right now, I guarantee every person who's watching this, whether you're watching live or you're watching at home later, you have ideas for game designs. That's why you want to design games, right? I don't think anyone's ever sat down and said, I'm going to design games, but I haven't got the first clue about what sort of thing I'd like to design. If that is you, by all means, let me know. I'd like to use you as a case study. But the point is that we won't always have the right ideas at the right time. So let's consider where ideas come from. The first sort of inspiration we can think of is passive inspiration. As you can see, you and your friends are out on an incredibly photogenic walk around the park. You're dancing in the sun, whatever it is people get up to. This is the sort of thing I do on the weekend. I don't know about you lot. You're doing something else, and suddenly there's an idea. It's a new concept for a game. It's a new method that will help you, build a particular mechanic into a game. It's a new mechanic entirely that you think no one's ever thought of, and you're going to try it out and slot it into your game. You add it into your game, and then, you're on fire. You're designing, you're developing, you're progressing your design. Inspiration has struck you like a bolt of lightning. For me, that usually happens when my brain is otherwise engaged. So my biggest time to get passive inspiration is if I'm being forced to sit still for a period of time. So, for example, I used to, before the days of like podcasts and audiobooks, which I could listen to on long journeys, if I was just listening to music while on a long drive, and my brain wasn't particularly engaged, I was engaged on the road, I was driving the car, I was listening to some music, but there wasn't like a narrative pulling me forward or anything. I would have loads of ideas, and I would regularly, in the days before smartphones, I would pull over motorway services, and I would either go and buy a notebook and write things down, or I'd phone a friend and say, I need you to write this down for me, because that's, I've got this great idea. I took my mum to watch some tennis for her birthday a few years ago, and she's a big tennis fan, and while I sat there, I was like, oh, this is all right. This isn't like I'm not on the edge of my seat. I'm quite enjoying this. My brain was sufficiently engaged that the creative part kind of have ideas. And I started thinking, oh, you could do lots of things with tennis actually as a tabletop game. And I had lots of little ideas there. So inspiration will passively strike at times, and you will rarely have any say over when that is. So that's one sort of inspiration. The other sort we're going to look at is active inspiration. And here's a little illustrative image of a person looking for active inspiration. It might not look like it, but they are. So the process here is that you're sitting down to work on a game, you're doing something, you're sitting down to come up with your test build, or you're sitting down to refine a mechanic, or whatever it might be. And you're in the process of designing and developing. Something is not right, something's missing, something isn't there yet. And so you work on finding an idea. The difference you'll notice between the two is passive inspiration happens, and then as a result of that, you go and do the work. Active inspiration is you need an idea, so you make an effort to go and find an idea. Now, obviously, active inspiration is the one that is harder because you have to put effort into it. You have to set aside time to actually generate the ideas that you need. But it's the one that is the most useful to us because it's not random. It's a thing that we can control. If you want to get good at designing games, or any creative endeavor, a lot of this crosses over into other creative fields, you have to kind of nurture the ability to create ideas, inspiration. I worked for 3.5 years, I think, in Games Workshop, where I was in the design studio, where every day in, day out, it was office hours, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. My job was to come up with rules for games. And if I was having a day where I just couldn't think of any, I was low energy, I was occupied with other things, I didn't just stop. I couldn't just say, no, I'm not designing today. Now I can. I've got the luxury of, being self-employed as a game designer. But then I had to find ways to generate inspiration. And I was quite lucky because I was working at the Games Workshop head office with a lot of very inspirational stuff around. There were, incredibly creative people working around. There were, there's a whole gallery of wonderful, beautiful miniatures and dioramas and things to go and look around and start getting some ideas. But I didn't have the option to wait for passive inspiration to strike. I had to go and seek out active inspiration. So yes, as I've said, passive inspiration is easy when it happens. You can't guarantee it, but you can encourage it. So ways to encourage passive inspiration, in addition to what I've already said, which is kind of find your state where you can engage your brain just enough that it can kind of fly around creatively and have cool ideas. You can encourage your brain to have more of these moments by basically training it to to think more about games. So go and play more games. The number one rule for being a good game designer is play more games. And it's the first question I ask a new designer generally is how many games you played in the last month. If someone wants to get started designing board games, and this goes out to everyone here, ask yourself, how much are you putting into your head compared to how much you want to come out of it? You need to, it's the same as anything. If you want to be an author, go and read a load of books and vary the things that you read. Similarly, vary the things that you play. If all you play is Euro engine builders, then you're not going to have many ideas of things beyond those realms. And if you try to create a new Euro engine builder, you're not going to innovate. You're just going to replicate what's already out there, because that's kind of the majority of what's in your head. So yeah, play more games. Get yourself into the mindset of, just playing games regularly and actively doing it so that you're kind of thinking about them from a game design point of view. Research subjects that interest you. So we'll talk about research in a little bit, but like part of it is just finding topics that you are interested in and engaging in them. Because if you're a person who wants to design games, you have that game design gene. If you find a thing that you're interested in, at some point your brain will go, there's a game design idea there. You could be reading about, I don't know. I mean, we're currently making a game about gardening, and that a lot of that came from working in our garden last summer. Where you think, actually, there's definitely sort of a game element to this, isn't there? Because you're trying to budget things, you're trying to time things. There's a lot of stuff that can go right or wrong, and there's good and bad strategies towards doing this. So we can gamify that. So yeah, seek out your passions and look outside of games. You can learn about game design theory. I mean, come to courses like this, do more reading. There are some fantastic books out there. There's all sorts of stuff you can kind of do in order to broaden your knowledge of game design theory. You can, in fact, I'll send out a reading list with a whole bunch of links which you can go and explore. And I encourage anyone who's got good ones to share them in the Discord server so that everyone else can see them. And then finally, getting involved in game design communities. A great way to think more like a designer and to have more design ideas is to meet other designers and play their games. And see, when you see their games, you might go, oh, that's a great idea. I could use that in something I'm working on. And ideas will occur to you because you're in that environment of playing games that are kind of developing. As it says there, the more you think about games, the more ideas you'll have. Incidentally, a game design community can be anything. It can be you and someone else who are designing games and chatting once a month. It could be, for example, the people you're on a game design course with. Last time we did game design online, we had quite a nice little community pop up around the Discord server, people, sharing ideas, swapping, that sort of thing. We also had a similar thing when we did the actual in-person game design courses back when that was a thing we did in 2018, I think it was. We'd go to the pub afterwards and people got chatting and stayed in touch, and it was a lovely little community. So get involved in communities. The more you kind of spend time doing that, the more you'll find yourself having passive ideas about game design. Hello, Emma. You're late. No worries. Welcome back. Welcome to the chat. You can catch up on the stuff you missed later. It's all right. I've been talking about inspiration and ways to get it. So that was passive inspiration. Yeah. Most importantly, with passive inspiration, though, don't lose it. I am dreadful for this. I will have a great idea and think, I'll remember that and write it down later. And then I'll have forgotten it. I'll come to the point where I get a pen and paper and I'll go, I had an idea. What was it? And it's gone. Now, maybe some people out there have brilliant minds, but whatever it is, whatever works for you, make sure that you always have some kind of method for taking notes and writing down ideas. It used to be a lot more difficult than it is now. I mean, these days we all have phones and things mostly, where we can write things down and use apps, whatever else. But yeah, I mean, a notepad and pen is never a bad thing. I know a designer who always keeps a little notepad in his pocket with a pen to write down game design ideas, and that's like his little bible of game design ideas. You can use recording apps. There's a great little recording app on Android called HiQ Recorder, and it's a freebie. I think you can record a certain amount for free. I think your notes can be up to 10 minutes for free, and you have 128 hours of storage. and you can just quickly click it on, say a thing, turn it off. Google Keep. Voice notes is free and good. Yeah, fantastic. Google Keep also has a voice notes function. Any sort of notes app, so Keep, OneNote. There's all sorts of things out there that you can use. The point is, have something which lets you capture that inspiration and keep it for later. If you keep it all in one place and you have some sort of filing system, bullet journals are a great way of doing this sort of thing. Look them up. Then you can come back and review it later and look at your ideas, and that is a really useful resource to have. Two important things there. You haven't got to write. So you haven't got to write things down with words. If you are more of a visual thinker, you can sketch, doodle. I mean, especially with game design, you can start sketching out components and things. A lot of my designs will start with a sketch of a card or of a board, whatever it might be. And finally, your ideas don't need to be complete. A little fractional nugget of an idea is still worth keeping, because once you've written it down, you can come back to it later and you might think of the second half of it later that makes it make sense. The key thing is just to make sure you're capturing that inspiration. But what about when passive inspiration isn't enough? When you need to generate inspiration? And the classic example of this, it's writer's block, isn't it? It's when you're doing a creative thing. I now call it creative block, because I feel that it happens to me in game design, and I don't feel like the imposter syndrome is too loud for me to call myself a writer. So I call it creative block, which sounds a lot more broad. But yeah, it's when you're sitting down to do a thing and you need to come up with an idea. You're designing a game and you need to think of a resource management system for this game. You have a 4-player game. They're all trading or farming weasels, as we said a minute ago, and you need some kind of system for how they are limited in how many weasels they can produce in a turn. And you need to think of a way to make this work which doesn't feel clunky and whatever else. And you sit down, you try a couple of things, and your brain dries up. Your inspiration just refuses to appear. So how do we get around that? And there are a lot of resources online for overcoming writer's block, and a lot of that will apply here. So I would say the first biggest step is to find things that inspire you and engage in them. As I said, when I used to work at Games Workshop, I'd go and look around at all the amazing displays. That was really cool. I've done things where if I'm stuck on a game design, I'll get up and go for a walk around the park and look at nature. I will go and go to an art gallery or a museum. I'll sit and play video games, because if they're like even vaguely related to the game I'm working on, just disengaging myself that much, but playing in a similar environment can help jog things. As it says, go and work on something else instead. I generally tend to work on 3 or 4 different game designs at once over a long period, so I can hop back and forth between the different projects. And the benefit of that is if you get stuck on one, it's usually because your brain is trying too hard. So if you disengage, work on something else, you might have little subconscious ideas about the first one. You can step away from game design entirely. Take a break. Unless you're in a position where you're being paid to regularly design games to a deadline. And if you're on this course, I'm hoping that isn't the case for you yet. If it is, good luck. Well done with the blag. But, if you're doing this as a hobby, you have the ability to say, no, you know what? I'm actually not making any progress. I'm going to step back and do something else. And I'm going to go and, I don't know, take up kite surfing or whatever it is you want to do. If you get stuck, another good thing is to set some limits or boundaries. One of the things we talked about on the Discord server was the fact that 18 card design challenges are quite a common thing, where you will see a publisher or something launch a contest where they say you can design a game that it can only use 18 cards and that's it. And even if that's not something you've got set up for your game, it's not a constraint you've put into your initial brief, it's not a thing you're initially going with, you can try it. You can say, actually, hang on, what if I say at this point, how would I go if I were to say I can only use one deck of cards, so 54 cards in my game, or I can't use any non-card components, no dice, no meeples, just cards. What happens if I get rid of the board? Add some constraints. Say I want this to fit into a small box, so anything that's too big can't be in. And even if you don't intend that to be the case for the finished product, it can help you get over that hurdle and get over and find that inspiration, because it limits your the different possibilities available to you, and that can really help galvanize you. go back through your notes. As I said, keep your notes in one place and go back through them. Rejected design ideas, things that you've cut out of designs, keep those in your notebook. Go through them. Go through all your little ideas and things that have inspired you previously. Look at those. Combine them in weird new ways and see what happens. I always find it very helpful to bounce ideas off people, whether another designer or just someone. I've had things where I've asked non-game designer friends, who some of them don't even have much interest in games. I said, look, can I just talk to you for a minute? And like a quick Zoom call works for this or something. I just need to vocalize the ideas and the problem I'm having, the inspiration I'm looking for, in a way that it will make sense to someone else. Because in doing that, I might unlock the answer within myself. And it's amazing how often that works. But also having another designer's input is handy as well. And that goes both ways. You can help them with their blockages. And finally, use productivity tools. There's all sorts of things like Pomodoro is a method that I use quite a lot, where I try to focus and do like intense periods of activity, because that can kind of help fire the brain and get you in the right mood where inspiration can strike. So yeah, if you can rely on passive inspiration, that's great. But if you need to, you can always generate more. So yeah, in summary, we all have loads of ideas until suddenly we don't. You can wait for passive or you can work for active. And most importantly, you can go at your own pace. You don't have to work on active inspiration if you don't want to. Martin's asked a question, which is great timing, because any questions? Pomodoro, yes. The Pomodoro method, Pomodoro being Italian for tomato, is a productivity tool where you get a timer set to 25 minutes, as John said there. And it's based on the idea that you get those little spinny kitchen timers that some of them look like tomatoes. That's why it's called Pomodoro. And you set it 25 minutes and you do 25 minutes of solid work on one thing. And then you have a 5-minute break. And in that 25 minutes, you do not let yourself get distracted by anything else. Any other things, you have a notepad by you and you write down any distractions and you deal with them in your 5 minutes, or once 25 minutes is over. And there are multiple online Pomodoro sites and YouTube videos, whatever else. And then the idea is every few Pomodoros, you do like a longer break. And it's a really helpful way to focus your brain and get you, functioning better for that sort of thing. And it's very handy. And what's handy is once you get used to it, you can start planning out your day by thinking, well, how many Pomodoros will that thing take? How many do I think that task is going to be? That's probably like a 3 pom is the term, a 3 pom job. So that means I need about an hour and a half to do it. And you start getting a better feel for how long you need to do things. I've got pretty severe ADHD, and it really helps me establish how long things will take. So yeah, feel free to share more productivity tips on the Discord server. But for now, any questions on any of that sort of stuff? Any questions on finding inspiration or making inspiration? No, beating inspiration with a stick until it happens. Some days do feel like that. No, cool. Going to move on. So, how do we develop a concept? Some of you did concepts for the exercise last week. Awesome, good job. No worries if you didn't. But the main thing is that a concept is rarely a thing that arrives in your brain fully formed. You may get inspiration, you might get passive inspiration, and suddenly out of nowhere it strikes and goes, you should do a game about this thing. But usually, like trying to recall a dream, when you actually sit down to try to think about what the details of that concept are, you'll realize that it has loads of big gaps and you need to do some work on it. So how do we go from like that kind of 1 paragraph pitch, the elevator pitch that you've done? It's a game about, what were some of the examples from Discord? Trading babies underwater or something? I forget what it was. There was feel free to go and look at the Discord channel. And if you come into this later, by the way, and the Discord channel no longer has that on it, just ask me. There was something to do with babies underwater. I forget what it was. But how do you go from that to an actual fleshed out thing that is ready to turn into an actual game on the table? So first step, get your idea, your concept for your game, whatever it might be. This is a tile laying game about harvesting rice on the moon, whatever it might be. Get that, write it down, keep it simple. 1 sentence. If you did the exercise last week, that's a good way of doing it. Like here, it's a something game about something set, in this setting. 1 sentence, dead simple. Once you've done that, vomit your ideas onto paper. Get all the ideas out of your head. Everything you can think of about the game, write it down. Hasn't got to be neat. Just flood the page with as many ideas as you possibly can. Just because what you're trying to do really at this stage is just capture everything that's in there so that you've got room to think of the next things. This can be a quick process or a slow one, by which I mean it could be that one day you have that great strike of inspiration, you go, oh yeah, I'm going to make my game about bowling, whatever it might be, and you sit down and you quickly jot this all out. Or over the course of a couple of months, you go, I'm going to work on a game about something, and I'm gradually going to do a little bit and add a little line every other day, and come to it. As well, you can skip this entirely and just go to the test build first and get something onto the table first. And really, the sooner you can get things onto the table, kind of the better it is. And then you can kind of come back and start refining the concept once you've just had that initial, does it actually make sense on the table kind of thing. From our point of view, because we always start with a very solid concept for the game, because we are usually working for a client and they said, I want a game about this thing, we start with this process and then we start building the test build. But as I've said, forge your own path. Whatever works for you works. Review your ideas. Yeah, so once you've got that written down, you've just blurted everything onto the page, go through and start trying to kind of sort and identify the ideas and different things. And you'll find you'll have ideas about all sorts of different things, and you can start looking for some common themes. So what is the player experience? What's the player doing on their turn? That could be like one of the themes you've got. So on their turn, the player is trying to X, Y, or Z. They're trying to gather resources, which will let them build things, which will let them do something else. If it's a role-playing game, on their turn, the player is making choices about the actions their character is going to make, and weighing the consequences of those actions. Theme. I think this game is going to be about rice farming on the moon, but actually it might not be. It could maybe be about rice farming on the seabed, or maybe it's not rice, maybe it's something else. As it says there, it's okay to have different ideas and contradictory ideas. You don't really need to start firming things up until way down the line. You can change things. So it's worth having multiple different options at this stage. What I'll talk about in a minute is how you can use all those different ideas. Complexity, is this a game? Is this the sort of thing that it's a game that is accessible to everyone? Is it a game that's kind of more for a hardcore audience? You'll start seeing if your ideas kind of lean towards one of those. Similarly, game length. You can start putting ideas about components. I think there could be cards, there could be dice. We can have custom things. Here's what they might look like. Here's how they might function. And yeah, you might start actually having ideas. You might initially have ideas for core mechanics. A lot of my ideas start with a core mechanic. When I was watching tennis, as I was saying earlier, I remember thinking, there's a really interesting thing in the way that you're trying to outthink your opponent. You're basically you're wagering your reaction times against theirs, and there's a whole thing about that. But it's the idea I had for it started with a mechanic. I forget what the exact mechanic was, but that was the starting point of the idea. So start kind of trying to draw your ideas into groups based on things. Oh yeah, Jamie, thank you. It was your one. Yeah, Jamie's game that was generated randomly was a hidden role game about babies trading under the sea, featuring betting and does not require text. I want to see this game. To Kickstarter, please. Once you've got your ideas written down and you've kind of sorted them out a little bit and got some sense out of them, and don't forget, it's an ongoing process. You can carry on adding to them. The next step, and this is really important, I recommend questioning your assumptions. Try to identify your assumptions about the game. So the stuff that you haven't written down because it's too obvious. Okay. Things that, players take turns. Players are trying to win. The game is balanced. The game takes place in one sitting. Famously, legacy gaming, which is a big thing in board games, or has been the last few years, where the whole kind of the theme of that is you play multiple games over a span of time and you change the contents of the game each time you play. You might unlock new boxes or add stickers or draw on things or tear cards up. That all came from an exercise. Rob Davio, the lead designer, was working for Hasbro, and he did an exercise on questioning assumptions. And one of the assumptions he had was that he identified, sorry, was that the game that you put back on the shelf is the same as the game you took off the shelf. And I think he did a great job in identifying that, because it's a really core assumption, right? I think actually it came as well from, he was working on a new Cluedo game, and someone jokingly said, "Why do people keep coming to dinner at this house? Someone dies every time." And it got him thinking, well, hang on, why is it that, is this in this little time loop? Why does each game not affect future ones? So yeah, look for your assumptions. Things you didn't write down, or things you wrote down but didn't really think about. They're the obvious choices. They will often be things that are common in other games that you play. So if you play a lot of roll and write games, there will be common threads that are in lots of those, and you'll probably just write those down because that's your first thought about how you're going to do your own roll and write game. But in each case, ask yourself why you've made that assumption, and see if you could make things more interesting by changing or removing it. And you will surprise yourself. And the deeper you can go down this route, the more innovative you'll get, the more inspiration you will find. Once you have done that, you can turn that into a pitch, like a fleshed out pitch. And obviously, again, if you did the exercise last week, you've done that. You've taken your initial sentence of an idea and turned it into a paragraph. And you can go a little bit deeper than we went last time with the exercise. The idea is to describe the game as succinctly as you possibly can, but cover as much information as possible about it. So, as it says here, think about how you describe it to a friend who wants to organize a game night, but is kind of in a hurry. You want to quickly say, "Oh, we should play this game because it's about this. Here's why it's cool. Here's what the theme is. Here's what the main mechanics are. Here's why it's unlike anything else that we're going to play. Here's why it's unique." And you're trying to get that information to them before they, start setting up. And it says, here's some things to consider. What sort of game is it? What's the theme? What are the mechanics? What makes it stand out? What's the USP? And you can take that pitch, and that's the thing you can refine over time, but that can kind of become a mission statement for your game. This is the game you're trying to make. You can, of course, change it down the line, but you don't have to. You can stick with it forever. And if you do make changes, you can stack them against it and say, have I made that change intentionally, or is it just kind of meandered from the path? Once you've made your pitch, the first thing to do is to review it. So do you want to play this game? Does it sound original? Does it sound interesting? If not, what do you need to change? Refine it. If you can put it in front of someone else, all the better. Again, put it on the Discord server, put it in front of other game designers put it in front of other gamers and say, is this a game you'd want to play? And that can help you kind of refine your pitch before you kind of start working on the next step. But again, of course, the caveat, as I said, is you can always just skip this and start getting components on the table and start playing. Now, you've got your pitch. You've got a notebook full of ideas, or whatever it is you're using to keep your ideas. Now you can start adding to that based on the pitch you've done, because probably in the process of refining your pitch, you'll have created more ideas. Write that down and now really start grouping them and turn those into what we call idea boards. When we say idea boards, what we mean is basically collections of ideas, mechanics, thematic things, whatever it might be, which will, each of which is on like one sheet of some kind. And you're going to use those to start developing your test build. So yeah, your idea board could be, as it says here, a sheet of paper, page in a notebook. I like to use Illustrator artboards because I can doodle around with them. I don't like doodling stuff freehand because I like the ability to undo. Sophie, who I design with a lot, she does everything manually, long form. She likes doing lots of doodles and sketches, quite intricate drawings sometimes about the kind of the themes and the feel of the game. Whiteboards are great for this, but I would recommend do a whiteboard and then take a photo of it, because really what you want is to be able to keep it so you got a record, but also change it. I'm sure there are, again, some fantastic apps for this sort of thing. Miro is actually a fantastic one, which I've started using recently. Not for idea boards, but for other things. Miro, and it's like a flow charting, and it's just like a big old whiteboard online, which you can do things with. So yeah, create your idea boards and get all of your notes. take them out of your notebook and put them into your idea board, just copy them across. And you'll find some of them might kind of collapse together into one thing. You might kind of have a refined idea. You might have something you go, actually, that's kind of veered away from what the project is, so I'm going to ignore that one. But get it all out onto your idea boards. It says you can include sketches, doodles, component ideas. Hasn't got to be written. And again, don't be afraid, even at this stage still, to have different ideas. It says there 3 different ways for how unit movement might work in your war game, or how resource management might work in your weasel farming game. Yes, excellent. Some good ideas there for apps and stuff in the chat. We'll talk about them in a bit. So yeah, once you've once you've created your idea boards, you can then start refining them. You will use them as a reference as you go through the test build. We'll talk about the test build in a minute. The whole point of that is you're taking the test build is the way you take your ideas and get them to the table. The idea boards are the conduit through which that goes, and you can use them as a reference point. If you've got multiple different ideas for something on your idea boards and you're developing a thing and it's not quite working, go back to your idea boards and think, actually, I had 3 options here. I only used one of them. If I take that out and replace it with this one, does that make things better? The whole point of this is to track your creative process and sort of set up little save points throughout, so that you can go back and redo things in a different way, or reconsider how the direction the project has taken. Also, you're creating a well from which you can draw inspiration later. So when you find yourself in that position where you're seeking active inspiration, you can go back to your idea boards and start thinking, well, hang on, what was my initial idea? What am I pushing for? What am I trying to achieve here? And are there things here that I haven't tried out yet? I talked last week about murdering your darlings. This is a great place to highlight them and flag them. Find the things in your idea board that you're most happy with, or most confident with. Not confident. You're most like keen on. The things that you're fond of. Beware those, because they may well outstay their welcome through your project. If you identify them here, you'll save yourself some time later. Just to give you some ideas, this is a game that I worked on years ago when I was first running Needy Cat. I was working on a little dungeon crawler game for a client who had ideas for all sorts of different things. But as you can see here, this is it was a dungeon crawler game, had some gridless movement, and here were some very rough ideas for how I was going to do that. And I did it through Illustrator with some very rough little stick figure doodles, just to kind of illustrate what I was talking about, with some little boxes and text and things. I went into a lot more detail here probably than I needed to. But the point is, I was just vomiting all my ideas out into these idea boards, and then using them. So once I'd done this, I could move on to something else and think about something else. This is for the same game. This is a thing which showed what a component might look like. So enemies might have like a little card with some injury slots. To be fair, this ended up being used in Gloomhaven. Weirdly, I'd not played Gloomhaven when this happened, but I had a very similar kind of idea for it here, with like little separate boxes for each variant of that enemy type. But yeah, so an idea board, this is one way of doing it. They haven't got to be like this. This is like, again, a component idea for this that ended up kind of almost being reused in Hellboy, if you've played Hellboy, the board game, where I had 6 stats in one corner, and I suggested little transparent plastic overlays which would show which color die is used for each of the different stats, with different colors being used to represent different proficiency levels. And all of this, none of this is stuff that ended up in the final project. It ended up getting cancelled, but I had like 3 different slides all about kind of different ways the hero panel could work. And I came back to that throughout the process and looked at it and thought, like, which one of these is the right one? Is this a thing that I could improve upon? So yeah, that's a load of idea boards. Any questions? Doesn't look like it. So let's get on to the last section of stuff, which is all about creating a test build. Just quickly check the chat there. Miro is really good. Yeah. I haven't tried Milo, or a mood board with links, images, and text. That's really interesting. Tell me more about that later. And tell each other more things about productivity in the Discord chat later. Right, so creating a test build. So we've got our idea boards. We've taken our concept. We've spread it out across a load of idea boards. How do we now turn that into a thing which goes on the table? So let's quickly recap. What's test build for? Test build is about getting your ideas in action as quickly as possible. 10 minutes of practical testing is worth several hours of theory, and you will get great solid information about what works and what doesn't. I know several designers who will talk to me at length about this great idea they've got, and multiple people I know who are professional designers who will say, I've got a great idea and I'm thinking I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. What do you think? And my answer usually is, have you tested it? Do you want to test it? Should we test it out? And a lot of the time they haven't. And the moment they do, they know immediately, oh, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. The test build is all about that. The key things we're looking for here is it's a rough prototype, quick sketches, rough notes. You're not spending too much time on making it look good. You can see there a game which was made in about half an hour at one of our previous design courses. We pushed people to make it quickly, and as you can see, it looks really scrappy, but it's cool. This is great. It was like a community farming game. The best bit was that you had a bag which represented a pig. It's called the pig bag, and you would throw your leftover vegetable scraps into the bag, and then people could. I don't know how it draw from them later. I don't know. That feels like that's the theme's gone off the rails a little bit there. You don't get your vegetables back from the pig, apart from figuratively. But yeah, whatever the case, as you can see, they had spent very little time on the look of it, which is great. That's what we asked them to do. There was no formal rules written down. That piece of paper you can see there was a reading list we'd given them. That was nothing to do with the actual game itself. And we asked them to play for 10 minutes, and that's what a test build should be. 10 minutes of gameplay. You are just going to get it out on there and see, is the concept good? Is it interesting? Is there fun in there somewhere? Is it a terrible idea? Should you turn back now and do something different? As it happened, that one was really good. I lost contact with them, actually. I'd love to know if they ended up continuing the development of that. I might have to look them up. But yeah, so that's what the test build is for. And remember the ignorables. We talked about ignorables last week. Things you haven't got to worry about at this stage. Don't worry about legible rules. Don't worry about attractive components. Don't worry about certainty. You can change your mind mid-test build. Don't worry about fine detail, start and the end of the game, or maths, stats, or balance. So all of that is stuff we talked about last week in more detail. If you want to have a better idea, go back and watch it again. But here's the thing. What we're talking about this week is when to actually start doing it. As I said, in our process, you can do it after you've made some idea boards, but you can, of course, skip those and just get something out. What I would recommend, if you feel that, and you really want to get things on the table as soon as possible, do it. Get to that stage, put some things out, try some ideas out, and then retroactively go and make some idea boards. Use your test build almost as like part of your research process. And then you can kind of, take a step back and carry on from there. Let's talk about how we actually do it though. So let's assume you've got your idea boards now. You want to go through them and try to identify a core gameplay cycle. The question you want to ask yourself is, what is a player doing on their turn when the game gets going? Ignore how the game starts, how they kind of wind up. If it's an engine builder game, assume they've built at least part of their engine. Ask yourself, what are they doing? If I'm a player, what decisions am I making? What things am I considering? What consequences am I trying to mitigate or deal with? And then start scribbling down how it'll work, or don't even scribble, just start thinking about how it'll work. If you need to borrow ideas from other games, that's great. I often use placeholder mechanics. I think I mentioned them last week, which is where I go, I will have a really cool system for this, but for now, it's not the most important thing. So I'm just going to borrow the card drafting mechanic from Seven Wonders or whatever it might be. Then, as quickly as you can, you want to start creating a rough prototype. Now, if it's a board game, you might be borrowing components from other games. If it's a role-playing game, you might, I don't know, start making character sheets by just quickly doodling stuff on a piece of paper. If it's a card game, you might grab a bunch of blank cards and a Sharpie and just sort of start writing things out. But you don't want to spend any time on this. You want to be as quick as possible. As I said, that test build you saw in the picture a minute ago, people made in about half an hour. So it's possible to be very quick at this stage. Once you've got something, try playing it by yourself. As soon as it's playable, even if there are bits missing, have a go at playing it. 5 to 10 minutes is what I would recommend. You just want to kind of get a feel, a couple of rounds of gameplay. It might not need that much. You might do 30 seconds and think, oh, yeah, that's broken. That's not going to work. Or 30 seconds and go, actually, that's brilliant. I want to think more about that. Once you've done that, start playing it. And while you're doing it, consider what is working, what is fun, and what doesn't work. What's fun can be relative. What's the most fun thing here? It hasn't got to be really fun and engaging by itself. It can be a thing which, down the line with development could be lots of fun. There's you can just about see a little bit of fun poking out of the soil, so you can start digging around at that. Make changes on the fly. Don't be afraid to be messy. The test build is for your eyes only. You might involve other people at some point, but really you are the focus. As long as you know what's going on, that's great. Scribble on things, cross things out. If you've got components that you've grabbed from somewhere else, switch them out for other things and just have fun. Enjoy the process of messy, chaotic game design at this point. Don't overthink it. Remember your ignorables. Don't get waylaid by trying to go into too much detail. Just enjoy the process of creation. If you stop and if you realize that it's not working, just stop and go back to the drawing board immediately. Don't linger. Don't try to, make something good out of it. Just go back and start again. As soon as you think you've learned something, stop playing. You will learn a lot very quickly, and there'll be lots of different lessons to learn. You will get ideas on, okay, this is obviously horribly imbalanced. This is, there are too many cards in my hand, etc., etc., etc. As soon as you pick up one of those things, and you might get 2 or 3 at once, but as soon as you get at least one, stop, review, start again. You can go through, at this stage, you can be looking at doing, half a dozen iterations on your game within the space of an hour, if not more. It's all about quick, effective change based on the feedback you get from playing by yourself. You don't need to bring someone else in. In fact, you shouldn't bring someone else in until you've done a fair bit of testing yourself. And you can do it with very few components. You can do it with scraps of paper. You can make a test build by yourself in a room with very little stuff to hand. So there's no excuse to not do it. And the barriers are very low. Once you've actually finished playing and you've got to a point where you think, okay, this is actually, there's some nice ideas here. I want to stop and rethink it. After you've got that you've learned something, make some rough notes. Don't spend too long. Again, keep it quick. Just write a few things down, write some observations down, and make some changes. As I said there, if you've got some different ideas for something on your ideas board, go back and identify different ones and try those out instead. I would recommend, if you've got, say, 3 ideas for something on your idea board, play the game 3 times before making any other changes, just changing that one thing. So you've got it with A, B, and C, and see which one of them feels most interesting. It might be they're all exactly the same, so just pick your favorite and move on. But later on, come back again and try A, B, and C. Play it again, same guidelines. So just keep it quick, keep it simple, find the fun, repeat it until things start firming up and changing less. Your aim is to have a vertical slice. I said a 10-minute there, but it really varies from game to game. What you want is enough game that it's chunky enough to feel like a game, but it's not overly elaborate. There's not too much going on. People are getting one short linear journey through the game. They are playing one round. Or if it's an incredibly quick game, they might be playing 2 or 3 rounds or something. If it's a really long game, they're not even playing a full round. They're playing one part of a round. You want to get this to the point where you can show it to someone else and not feel like you've wasted their time, because you want them to kind of give it a go and they can give you feedback on stuff. So you need enough stuff there. And this is a learning process. You will find that your first test build, you will do this far too late. Your second one, you do it far too early or something, but you will get good at this just through doing it. Like I said last time, the more you design games, the better you will get at designing games. So keep at it. Then find a willing victim. Find someone who will support you in your game design endeavors. You want someone you can trust, someone who will understand that this is a very early test build. They're not going to expect something pretty. They're not going to hold it up against existing games and compare it to them. This is a thing that can take time to find someone this helpful, but whatever the case, nothing else, just find a person And it could be a case of finding someone online and quickly running it through there, but that involves having to know how to make online prototypes, and that's a whole separate thing. We'll talk about that a little bit in probably session 6, actually. Once you've got your participant, give them a rough idea. What you want to do is you want to kind of build a bridge between where the game is and where you envision it being. Help them see what you see when you look at this collection of torn up bits of paper and scrap. Don't worry about like going into great detail. Just give them the vision, give them the flavor of the game. Explain the rules. Again, don't write stuff down at this stage. Don't worry. Don't tie yourself in knots trying to write clear rules. Just tell them how it works. Talk them through it. I mean, I've talked before about how game design and rules writing are two different things, and this really is the distillation of that. And anyone who doubts that, ask yourself if you ever played a board game that everyone knows the rules to, or any kind of game. Everyone knows the rules to Scrabble, or you know what I mean. There are certain games that the rules get passed around orally rather than by people reading rule books. Drafts, chess, these sorts of things. It's very much possible to just teach games without having to have any written rules, and that's what you want to do here. Once they've played the game, and again, make sure they know there's an end point in sight. It's only going to be a short couple of rounds or a single round. Ask them what they thought, and you can direct your questions by saying, was it fun? Was it interesting? What did you like? What was unexpected? What was boring? What would you change is a great question to ask at this stage. Hopefully, because the game will be probably quite a mess at this point, they'll have quite a lot to say. We'll talk more next session about playtesting, but one of the main things is tell them they mustn't worry about giving you criticism, and asking them what one thing would they change is a good way to break that ice and get them to give you an actionable piece of feedback. Then basically you do exactly what you would do if you're playing solo. You make notes, you amend your prototype, and you repeat and carry on. So a test build is never done, but there's definitely a point at which you have to decide you want to move on. Once you've got that vertical slice and you've shown it to someone else and you're happy with how it's looking, you need to move on to the mechanical draft. And really at that point, it's the point at which you feel like you want to look beyond that very narrow vertical slice of your game. When you start feeling like, actually, I really want to see how the game gets to that point or what happens after that, that's when you move on. It's tempting to do it sooner than you should. You should be happy with what you see in that little chunk before you start expanding. So it's possible to stay in the test build phase for quite a long time. And again, it's just going to come down to your instincts, which you will develop over time on when it is right to move on. But generally, my rule of thumb is once you're happy with the core gameplay loop, that's when you can start moving onwards. So here's some final top tips for the test build. Top test build tips. Borrowing components is easier than making them. Don't make anything from scratch. Borrow it from other things. Raid car boot sales, charity shops, old board game collections. Look on eBay. Just grab collections of components. We've got a set of printable templates, which I'll email out to you with the slides for this, which you can use to print them on card, or you can print them. I've got a whole little video on how to make quick test build cards, or even cards that we use for later prototyping, which are very easy to update using card sleeves and paper. Don't get fancy. Do not illustrate your test build. I've seen people do it. Don't feel the need to start drawing lots of lovely stuff. No more than 5 minutes per set of components is like a good rule of thumb. Restrict your materials is a good way to avoid distraction. So a classic example is hex grids. Hex grids are really popular in a lot of games. So grids of hexagons. They are often tricky to cut out and all that sort of thing. You can get exactly the same thing by laying square tokens in like a brickwork pattern. So they're slightly offset. You'll get exactly the same thing. So you can say, I'm only going to use squares, and that will mean you're not cutting out circles and hexagons and all sorts of other things. Bodge custom components. If you've got like custom dice you want to have, just use normal dice and a little table to translate it. Again, at this stage, you're mainly writing for you. You're not worrying about making it decipherable to anyone else. So yeah, there's some tips for the test build. Any questions on the test build or anything else before we get into this week's exercise? Looks like no, so let's move on. Again, if you have any questions, you can join us on Discord and ask them there afterwards. So this week, again, the exercises are completely optional. There is no pressure whatsoever to do them. You're not doing better if you do them. You're not doing worse if you don't. It's just a way to help you focus your mind on the things that you've learned this week. And funnily enough, it's make a test build. So you can either use your pitch from session 1. If you haven't done that already, you can go back and look at the exercise in session 1 and use that to create a little game pitch, or use the system that we talked about earlier. Develop your concept. So write down your ideas, do some research, create some idea boards. Keep it simple, because this is just meant to be a little exercise. Don't develop the next Twilight Imperium. Save that for week 6. Just do something simple. Get it written down, and then create a very, very simple test build. Remember the ignorables. Get that slide of the ignorables, print it out, and put it in front of you while you're doing this test build. Do not make it pretty. I want it to look ugly and horrible and, appalling. Just make it playable. That's all that matters. And then take a photo, put it on Discord. Show me what you've got. Again, you don't have to, but if you do, I'll have a look and tell you what I think. And everyone else can do the same as well. Next week, we'll look at testing. And if you want to do next week's exercise, it might be useful to do this week's one first. You won't have to, but it will be useful to. But you don't have to test it this week, but you might want to. Right, so, excuse me, we are done. That is, just about 1 hour. Fantastic. I'm getting better at timings. So I'm going to go and hang out on Discord now. I'll answer a few questions. You'll get all the stuff sent out to you. I'll send you the email with the slides, full recording, all that sort of thing. As ever, if you enjoyed this, please let people know. Hashtag NeedyCat Design Course is available if you want to use it. The more people come to these things, the more I enjoy them. That sounds really needy, doesn't it? Maybe it should be Needy James Games instead. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah, mainly the more people come along to these, the more we feel the impetus to do more of them, and the more we're kind of building our library of board game design advice. So yeah, come along. Come join me on Discord. I'm going to go over there now. bit.ly/ncg1001. The capitals are important. If you're coming along to next week's one, that'll be in, funnily enough, 7 days, same time. Thank you ever so much. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for joining us then. I'm going to switch this off now and get going. So see you on Discord.